Welcome everyone to Trusting Kids. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This panel discussion is hosted by the Three Rivers Village School and is a part of the Remake Learning Days, which is an innovative learning festival for youth and families, and it takes place across Western Pennsylvania and beyond. For more information, please go to remakelearningdays.org to find out more. I'm Maggie, your moderator for the evening, and I'm also a staff member at the Three Rivers Village School, as well as mother of 2 students there. So what does it mean to trust kids within the sphere of education? We can think about what choices we allow them to make. Do we allow a few token choices or choices from a menu of our creation? Or do we trust them with almost all of the choices, like how they'll spend their time at school, who to spend their time with, and what interest they'll pursue? A common term for the latter is self-directed education. Tonight's panel discussion will focus on this kind of education, specifically as it occurs within schools that self-identify as Sudbury inspired. Lots of the ideas will overlap with other self-directed spaces like various learning centers and some homeschool methods. I believe that what we discussed tonight can be quite valuable to families, whether they homeschool or send their kids to public or private schools. Giving kids the opportunity to make choices about what they find interest in, how to go about their exploration of it, and how they synthesize it into their lives, for many adults is no easy feat. Choosing any level of self-directed education as a path requires trust. We all care deeply about our kids, so letting go of control can be scary, even if we're giving it to the same people we're caring for. Hearing about other people's experiences can make it seem less mysterious. So I'm excited to hear about the experiences all our panelists have had building their ability to trust and about why it has impacted their lives. Each of them have 1 or more roles within 4 different schools that self-identify as Sudbury inspired. So now I'd love for our panelists to introduce themselves.
So my name is Cassie Clausen. I am a staff member and founder of the Open School. We are based in Orange County, California. We started the school in 2015, so we're just finishing up our 6th year here. And we have students ages 5 to 16, and we started a virtual program this year also. So we actually have people enrolled that aren't just local anymore. And I also have 3 kids. They are ages 12, almost 10, and almost 7. And they've only ever been to the Open School. They've never had any kind of conventional educational experience. So I've been able to watch them learn a lot of basic things, and we'll talk more about that. But and then my pronouns are she, her, and I think that covers my introduction for now. I'll talk more later.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Juliet Martinez, and I'm just going to say this is Ari. I want to introduce Ari, but just this is my 17-year-old who goes to Three Rivers Village School, and I also have an 11-year-old who goes there, and I'm a freelance writer here in Pittsburgh. And I actually recently wrote an article about how the school has weathered the pandemic and kind of navigated all of the different choices. And it was really fun to get everyone's perspective on it. So I really love the school. And my pronouns are they, them, and she, her.
Hi, I'm Ari. I'm a student at Three Rivers Village School. Me and my younger brother both go there. I've been going for about 2 years now, and next year will be my sort of senior year in high school. And I've been to almost all kinds of schools there are. Public school, charter school, magnet school, Catholic school. And I've never really fit in most of them. The closest thing I had was in 6th grade, and I joined an ROTC program. But I've never really had a positive experience in more traditional schooling. And TRVS has, like, going to a democratic school has has changed how I view learning in school completely. And yeah, my pronouns are they, them. And I think that covers it.
Okay, I think I'm supposed to go. My name is Noelle McCutcheon, and I'm with the Highland School in Ellenboro, West Virginia. We've been here since 1981. We're the only day and boarding democratic school in North America. I went here from the very beginning of my education, from 4 years old until I graduated. After college, I came back and have been a staff member. This is my 17th year. I have 2 children that have only ever been here, and that's my daughter, she's 13, and my son is 9.
My name is Robert Lucas. All my friends call me Reb. My pronouns are he, him pronouns. I was a founder of the Fairhaven School and the Philly Free School. Both of those are still in operation. I was also, in addition to staffing at both of those schools, I staffed at the Cedarwood Sudbury School in Santa Clara, California. That school has since closed. I have 2 children now that are 13 and 11 years old. My 13-year-old attended the Philly Free School from the time that she was 4, right up until she was 11. Now she attends the Circle School, very similar philosophy here in central Pennsylvania. And my son attended the Philly Free School since he was 2, before he was an official student, because both his parents worked there. And we all recall the day of his admissions interview. He had already been going, attending for a couple of years. So that was good fun. Happy to be here on the panel. Thank you.
Great, awesome. Thank you for those introductions. So I'm going to start this discussion off with some questions for Noelle and Ari, students, and so, Noelle being a former student, Ari being a current student. And the first question is, when you come or came up upon a hard moment at school, for example, you were bored, felt stuck, like you didn't know what to do with your time, or lost, like you didn't know how to proceed in learning a new skill or concept, how did you pull through?
So I tend to kind of rotate through different rooms and activities at school. So I'll spend about an hour in the computer room and about an hour in the art room, about an hour in the library, music room, and I kind of rotate through those. And so when I'm like really bored and kind of antsy and like pacing around, usually I'll go to a different room and there's often a project going on or something's open on one of the computers, and something usually comes to me. I have a bunch of different art projects that I work on almost every day, that I bring with me to school. So when I'm bored of one thing, I just kind of go to the other, or just kind of sit there until like I have a eureka moment and something comes to mind. But there's always something to do. Yeah, I think that's it.
For me personally, when I was younger, because I was always in this type of education, my boredom wall sort of stuff that we talk about a lot in these types of schools was usually when I was a younger person. And the thing that was always said to me, and it's still the phrase we use at our school all the time, which is, what are you going to do about it? When I would say I'm bored, they would say, well, what are you going to do about it? Because it's my responsibility to solve that. So that was always really important for me to remind myself, if it wasn't reminded of, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to spend my time? What sounds appealing to me? So that's kind of how I always handled it.
Nice. Can you talk about how the freedom within your school and education impacts or impacted what you decided to learn or chose to learn or are learning currently?
So when I was in 8th and 9th grade, I went to online school, And something that I remember is that after 1 year, I don't remember if it was the end of 8th grade or the end of 9th grade, but I've completed all my work for the school year and said to my mom, "Oh, thank God the school year's finally finished. I can learn now." And I immediately went to the library and checked out like 20 books about algebra and, the science of the universe and chemistry and history and like art and things like that. And and just went through all of them in the span of a couple of weeks, because I felt so stifled in online school. And so that like couple of weeks when I had all this freedom to learn it's been like that almost every day at TRVS. I had that freedom to learn. There's tons of books in the library, and I have a smartphone. I have the entire world at my fingertips. And there's and so much is available for me to learn, and there's no like restriction saying you have to learn this specific thing in this specific way at this specific time if I want to. And so I think it's been a very valuable experience for me, learning like what is important to me to learn and where I want to take what I want to take with me in life. Yeah. And I think that freedom has really given me the chance to grow as a person. And yeah.
And I would say for me, probably the biggest thing that I learned from my time there that I don't know, I mean, I probably would have eventually learned it, but not necessarily, was responsibility, because I was responsible all the time for all the decisions I made. And there was time and space for me to reflect on the experiences I had and the choices I'd made to figure out, okay, was that the best choice? Was that not? And it helped me learn how to evaluate situations so that I can make better decisions going forward. So that was, I think responsibility is probably the biggest thing, because I didn't come out then as an adult, now having to learn how to really be responsible for myself.
Awesome. And so my third question is, did and does being trusted by your family and school staff help you trust more in yourself?
I would say yes, because before I started at TRVS, I had this anxiety that when I was an adult, I was just going to when I moved out, I was going to have no idea what I was doing. And so when I started going to TRVS, my parents put trust in me to, be productive with my time and make wise decisions. And it kind of gave me that confidence in myself in learning that I'm gonna be okay when I get older and I finally like move out and go out into the world, because I've been given the chance to be responsible and be independent, and my parents have put that trust in me, and it's paid off.
And I would say that the experience for me of being in a democratic school where mistakes are really seen as an opportunity for growth instead of the worst case scenario, oh no, you can't make a mistake, gave me a lot of confidence to be able to make decisions, whether they were poor decisions or good decisions. I didn't feel like it was going to be the end of the world if it was the wrong decision. And so going through that, it gave me confidence that I can make decisions. I can make good decisions. I can trust in myself in whatever I choose to do and how I respond to situations.
Excellent. So I have a couple questions now for parents who are on the panel. My first question is, can you give an example of an event or a specific moment in your life when you decided that self-directed education was right for your family?
Well, we decided before we had children and kind of never even like rethought about it. But the moment that really sealed the deal for us, I think, is my husband and I had the opportunity to visit Summerhill School in England, which is, I believe, the oldest self-directed democratic school in the world. And we were given a tour by a 10-year-old girl who toured around a group of 20, 25 adults and completely held her own, answered really hard questions about learning and education and all of this. And we saw the school meeting, and it just, I just couldn't imagine my children being any place else. It just was so striking how comfortable these children were around adults, and that it was like they were, sometimes some of the adults' questions were like questioning their very being, and like, are you really, like, it was like really hard, and they just had this sort of sureness in themselves and confidence. And so that was kind of I think that was a moment that was like, yeah, this is it.
Well, I grew up in Western Colorado, and when I was 13, my family moved to Guatemala, and I went to a school there for a year and a half, maybe. And I just had like a variety of hardships that it wasn't going well for me. And I ended up dropping out of high school, and I ended up taking the GED. And I was 14. So at that point, I just had jobs, I had family responsibilities, I traveled quite a bit. My parents are like the original free range parents. I traveled all over Central America by myself on buses. I just, that was like really normal for me. And I made friends. I read a lot of books. I did a lot of things on my own. And when I started college, I was 18, and I met all these peers who didn't know what they wanted to do with their lives. They really seemed incapable of making big decisions, or a lot of them were not very good at making small decisions either. And I realized what a great position I had been in for 4 years. I had spent all this time. I mean, and it's not, I mean, my parents were like pretty typical in some ways. I mean, I had to follow rules when I was at home. It wasn't like anything went. I just did have a lot of autonomy. And so from that time, like, I realized how valuable it was that I had all this practice making decisions, and all of these times where there were some high stakes situations that I was in, and I had to deal with that. I just had to get comfortable with that. So I always liked the idea of self-directed education for my children. Ari is kind of a natural autodidact. So as we went through different challenges with different schools for them, I was always confident that they were learning, because I knew that they were learning they would teach themselves. Yeah. And then, when we found out about TRVS, I was very confident that this is a way that Ari could learn. And when Blue, my other child, wanted to go there, I was, they're very different. They have a very different personality, but I also feel like it's still so valuable for them to have that opportunity to be in charge of their time and engage with the school. I have this kind of like, going beyond the scope of the question, but I think just coming from my background, it was clear to me that there's a lot of value in giving kids a lot of autonomy.
So my experience is a little bit like Cassie's, in that I had come to Sudbury philosophy and really embraced it as an educator first, and then decided to have children later. And when I first started working in Sudbury schools, I was one of very few staff members then that were trying to found a school and staff it, for just everybody's kids. But I do want to say, I have a sister who's 3.5 years older than me, and I have a sister who's about 9 years younger than me. And my older sister, for whatever reason, wanted to be a third parent in my life. It was kind of like that was her role, or how she saw herself, keeping me in line and keeping me safe and protecting me. And, and there are things that are about that relationship that were wonderful. But there were things about that really irritated me and really got me to thinking, like, you're not the boss of me, and why are you in charge of me, and why you get to make these decisions and I can do, and I have competency. And for whatever reason, when my little sister joined the family, I just made a decision to try and relate to her on a different way, in a different, and so even when she was tiny, I just treated her like a peer. And I just told her what, how I thought of things and didn't impose. And I just got in this habit of kind of power sharing, with somebody who was much younger and smaller. And, we just ended up with a really genuine relationship that felt to me like, this is, better, or it allows certain, exchange to take place. And there's something to this day that's still pretty magical about our connection. So I certainly approached my experience with young people, in schools with that kind of attempting to do it in that spirit. And certainly once I started having children, it has got me out of many jams to be able to not claim to know all or be deciding, from on high. And sometimes as an educator, you're expected to do that. But to be able to kind of relinquish that with my kids. And I remember even when my daughter was barely talking, and I was like, I don't know, you've got 4 words. Can you please use them and try and help me figure this out? So my daughter in particular got really comfortable with this role of like, okay, we're on a team and here's my piece of it. So I think that will help, I think that's on point. The end.
I'll just briefly say, obviously, I spent my whole life in this type of education. So I believed very strongly in democracy and what it means for young people pretty much my whole life. So when I met my husband very early on, it was making sure he got on board with that. But that's always what I wanted for my children.
Awesome. So without the standard benchmarks such as testing, grades, and evaluations that are typical at Sudbury schools, how do you watch for indicators of growth and development in your kids?
I guess I'll jump in. So for me, I listen and interact with them to hear where they are with their goals and their journey and what's important to them. Because to me, in general, what it is really about is what is developmentally and what is growth for what they define it as, not what I define it as.
Yeah, I would say not having the testing and evaluation assessment is very freeing for parents. It's not just freeing for kids, but it's really freeing as a parent to not constantly be worried about where is my child on this like arbitrary milestone marker map. And because that's so exhausting, and your child will always have places where they don't measure up on that because it's not made for your particular child. So, the way, like watching for indicators of growth and development, I mean, I live with them, and, kind of like Noelle says, like having conversations and there's times where I definitely, we notice things like, oh, did you see that he just did that thing? Or did you, my daughter completely has, she's been really into digital art, and she has a tablet and she draws on it. And I really haven't paid much attention to it. And I really didn't know what she knew. And then just a couple weeks ago, she was like, hey, can I show you this thing that I made? And she had, there's a video game she loves called Little Nightmares, and there's a video game character in it. And she drew that character and created this art, using Procreate, which I've never opened that app. I don't know a thing about it. It's an area in which my 9-year-old now has totally eclipsed her parents on this information. She has to teach us, it has layers and it has brushes and it has all of these different things. And I mean, it was super impressive, this thing that she created. But even, sometimes that's like, there's this product oriented thing that we have to be aware of, but like, that's sometimes the things where that's how I realized, oh, wow, you've completely taught yourself this thing unbeknownst to me, almost invisible to the outsider. And now it pops up, and that's where I feel like there's these pops of things that come out, and you're like, oh, how did you even know that about the universe? And how did you even learn that about grammar? And what do you mean about that meme? I don't know anything about what you're talking about, and they come out with it. And so yeah, that's what I guess, you live with them. And then when you are free from that perspective of assessments mean learning, it's easy to see all of the indicators of growth and development.
I'd like to just jump on that point for Cassie. I mean, we've all kind of drunk the Kool-Aid and experienced like the joy of like having crossed that Rubicon, right? But I just want to make sure that parents like, okay, sure, you get freed from being on this like rubric and trying to measure your kids and check that are they on grade level, and wonderful to not feel like you have to be beholden to that. But if there are parents watching that are feeling anxious about that, wouldn't be freeing to me. That would be disorienting to me. I just want to validate that experience as well. Like there's lots of parents that transition into these programs, especially when their kids are older, that have gotten used to this idea of not worrying about whether their kids are learning because they're doing just fine, or because they're hitting the benchmarks, or, they're on grade level, or often the case, they're above grade level, so I don't have to worry about that, or, so without taking away from Cassie's position at all, I want to acknowledge that it can be anxiety inducing to let go of a report card, and then to have to figure out, how do you measure growth? I remember from serving on admissions panels when applicant parents would ask, well, how will I know if my kid is learning? And we would always say, well, you ask them, and I think that is nice, rather than assuming that how they're doing in math because they got an 84 on their report card or B- or whatever. You're forming an opinion or an impression as to what their growth is like. And I think that when it is an organic impression, and when you ask them and let them kind of talk to you about, then they have stuff to say. It's not like most parents' conversations when kids are in a traditional school setting. You're like, so how was school? And what did you learn? And kids are just like, and then what's your favorite subject? And I'm done. I have no more questions, Like when you ask kids that are in charge of their education and are self-directing it, what are you curious about? Or what are you thinking about doing next? You tend to get a more open-ended, it's a more open-ended question, and you get a response that's usually pretty thoughtful, and pretty substantive, and there's a lot then to talk about.
I want to jump in. I think I have never cared about my kids' grades, and I hate standardized testing. I hate that my kids had to ever participate in that. Yeah, I'd like to burn all of that down. I'm just going to put it right out there. I'm really excited about my kids having the space to try things socially, to have arguments, to be accountable, to develop relationship skills. That for me, and social emotional skills that I know there are some wonderful schools in the world where they really want kids to learn social and emotional skills, but it's never first. It's never first. And children's mental health is never first. I'm sorry, it's not. And my blood is pumping as I think about the times and the many times that my children's mental health suffered while the instruction just marched right on. So I don't care. I know my kids will learn if they are able to, like, my kids can learn. I know they can learn. I'm not worried about them learning. I want them to be able to have good relationships. I want them to be able to deal with conflict. I want them to be able to, somebody mentioned, maybe it was when I was reporting for that story, but like dealing with bureaucracy. You learn how to deal with bureaucracy. You learn how to organize people around an idea. You learn how to do all these different things. There's a great, there's something from, I'm a Baha'i, that's my religion. And there's a great thing that I learned in Baha'i, which is that if someone has a good character, but they're uneducated, they can always learn. But even without academic learning, they will be a blessing to those around them. They can contribute. They will be of service. They will make the world a better place because they have a good character. But without a good character, no matter how much you learn, and actually the more a person learns with a poor character or a corrupt character, the worse they become for the world. It actually makes them into a better weapon. So there is really, so for me, the academic learning has to be second. I know my kids can learn, and actually, you know, how do we observe it happening? You know, I recently had a conversation with my 11-year-old Blue where they said to me that it used to be when they were at their old school and people would say mean things to them, and this happened a lot because, you know, it's just like kids say mean things, and then when their only accountability is whether or not the teacher is looking, they get good at doing it when the teacher's not looking. Blue said that they would just feel really sad and they would want to cry and they wouldn't know what to do. And now somebody says something mean to them, they're like, that's not right. They speak up and say something back. And I was so thrilled to hear that, because it just means that their relationship has changed. You know, their relationship with aggression, their relationship with negative peer interactions has changed. So, you know, in those conversations, like, you just see it happening, but I expect it to be organic. I expect it not to follow a trajectory that I can map out. And, you know, and I know that that my kids are going to learn academic things too, you know. I don't even know what, I mean, like, I know my kids are doing, Blue loves to play video games, and I don't know what they're learning, but I know they're learning a bunch of stuff. I do know that they're learning a bunch of stuff that will probably someday be visible, you know, but it's that softer, non-academic social and emotional learning that is most important to me. And I see that happening.
So kind of on the flip side of that question is, what do you find most challenging as a parent about trusting your kids with education, if anything?
Well, I'll start and hopefully I'll be brief. I mean, I've tried to avoid the pitfalls of my education for my kids. Like, I had a particular experience with schools, a particular relationship with schools, which was not satisfactory. So I wanted to keep my kids from having that experience. And the closest articulation to like a, you know, philosophy of education that I could, you know, that would resonate with me, you know, I could accept was this Sudbury or this self-directed education philosophy. And I think it's orders of magnitude better for my kids than, the kinds of things that they've been exposed to and the volume of ideas that they've been exposed to and the number of things that have stuck and that they've made connections with has eclipsed, what as a conventional school educator, I could have, exposed my best students to on my best days. It's a completely different return on investment. But I do wonder, because I'm such a fundamentalist about this philosophy and so, wary of impeding their growth or interfering, there are times when, my wife and I feel like, but shouldn't we, but isn't this one thing worth like interrupting their normal self-directed education to kind of talk to them about? Is it racial justice? Is it consent? Is it sexually transmitted diseases or smoking or addiction or porn or whatever it might be? It's safety, we'll talk about later. And every time as a parent, you think, well, this is a safety concern, so I get to interrupt for this. In our household, we pretty much sit on our hands, and we've so far not done a lot of interrupting and interjecting, but we do wonder if there are things, values that we should be front loading or pitfalls that, we're doing our kids a disservice to by not kind of making sure they know about some awful crap that's out there. Or some great thing that's out there that they will have missed out on because we didn't tell them about it.
I will say, I think it's, I think that Maggie can testify to this, that I worry. I'm a worrier, and I will get in touch with the staff and say, hey, my kid didn't want to go to school for a number of days. That was very recent. Is something happening that I don't know about? Or, oh my gosh, my kid spends all day, every day playing Roblox. That happened too. It's not happening now, but it did happen for a while, and that was hard. It's hard to sit on your hands sometimes when what is happening does not look like learning. It doesn't look like learning, and you may not be having those big conversations. And a friend of mine who studies learning and personality, I just remember him telling me these anecdotes about kids who had a certain kind of learning style, and it just looked like nothing was happening forever. Like not forever, but like for long periods, it looked like nothing was happening. And then you'd be like, oh, wow, something happened. But during that time, sometimes I feel like I'm white knuckling through it, but it's not enough to shake my confidence in the school or in the ultimate experience that my kids are having. But sometimes I worry.
Yeah, I think the hard places are there's oftentimes it's the external voices that have become internalized of like fear and anxiety and I think the thing that's hard sometimes of this is a long game, and that so often the promise of a school or the promise of an education is like instant results and being able to see your child doing these things. We promise they will learn to blah 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 by the time by the end of this year or whatever. And because trust-based education is about raising an adult, and that's a long period of time, that those day-to-day, sometimes you're like, God, what are we doing? Like you're just, there's a lot of what we can call or judge as nothing going on. And then, but that's, that's just sort of that internal monologue to myself as far as when it just feels like nothing's happening and realizing like this is a long, and if I think about what my kids were doing, 3 or 4 years ago, they've made huge leaps since then. So it's not, they're not like stagnant, clearly. It's just harder to see in a short period of time, maybe going back to that, because there's not like the things that we can mark and say, look, you're improving in blah, 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 because we see it on a graph. So that is the flip side of that. And I do want to say, like to Reb's point a little bit, is that, but like parents are, you don't have to censor yourself. I think if anyone's getting that, I don't think that's what Reb was saying, that like, you're not allowed to speak because you're an adult, but like, as adults, as parents, we have our own interests and things and values and things we care about. And I think, bringing that to to our family and stuff is part of it. And sometimes, I mean, regardless of what educational model you follow, your kids couldn't give a crap about what you think and what your interests are and what your values are and what you want to share with them. And sometimes it hits, sometimes you say something and they're like interested in it, and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that the thing about the adult ego is to like let it go, when it's like they don't care, just move on.
And obviously I have the extra perk of having always been in this. So I don't find personally a lot of the trust stuff, but obviously I work with parents at our school that struggle with that. And one of the things that we try to go back to with them is the very beginning. Your kid learned how to talk. Your kid learned how to walk. Those are incredibly difficult things that they figured out. And so carrying that faith that they were able to do those incredibly difficult tasks, they did that they can get what they need. They can figure out because they are reaching out and curious about the world around them. They can do that. Is something we talk about a lot with parents to try to help get past the trust stuff, because it is hard, and it's hard to do when your whole experience is not that at all to this point. So we really try hard to support parents with that as much as we can. I know for me, probably the most challenging thing as a parent that I dealt with was my son had essentially some difficulty with speech. And it was something that his grandmother on my husband's side was very aware of, and in fact brought up speech therapy to him and all sorts of things when he was very young, when I wasn't present, which I think probably carried with him a little bit. But because that was brought up to him, I said, do you want to do this? He said, no, we didn't. He speaks perfectly fine now, figured it out himself. I had faith in that, but you have to really, it took faith. I mean, it really does, explaining to people that kids can figure these difficult things out. They really have that ability. They have since they came out. So that's what we try to do to help support with the trust difficulty.
Those are great answers. So I want to leave enough time for a decent amount of questions from our audience. So if we could keep that in mind for the last couple of questions I have here for the founders and staff, Reb, Cassie, and Noelle. Freedom at self-directed schools means students can pursue their interests, whatever they may be, for as long as they choose. And along with that freedom comes a great amount of responsibility. Can you talk about why that is? And what about specifics such as safety? Big one, I know. Just condense it all into a minute or two. No problem.
I'll try. So the biggest thing is when kids are responsible for what they know and don't know, there isn't someone else for them to blame, to say, oh, I don't know XYZ because you didn't teach it to me. It's their responsibility. They have ownership in that. That's why I think the responsibility part really comes in. I'll try to be very brief. In the very, very beginning of our school, the first couple of years, there were health and safety rules for the exact concern that kids wouldn't know how to be safe or wouldn't have that understanding. And the staff from that era can tell you it was a very unsafe place to be because the only rules were these safety rules imposed by staff. And when those went away, when they went to the wayside and we really went with, we as a community make our rules. One, there was a lot more safety rules made by the students that said, these are the things we know don't work for us. And so the school became a much safer place. And it was all of them knowing I am responsible for my safety, for my fellow student safety, for the staff member safety. That's part of my job too. And so they're much safer when they're in control. as part of our whole group, as opposed to it being imposed on them.
And well, first I'll point out how mean it was for Maggie to say, and make sure that we, in interest of time, are really concise. And then let me ask this really broad question about all the interests under the sun plus safety.
Yeah, that's my present, my gift to y'all.
Well done. I want to say that I do think that if students are allowed to pursue their own interests, and they're allowed to create their own spaces, I agree with Noelle's point that they know kind of what boundaries make sense for them. They know what kind of culture they want to be a part of. I think that I've seen students do a really tremendous job of creating a culture of respect, for not just for one another, but even a culture that recognizes differences in students that come in. It's not super cliquey or exclusionary or making kind of arbitrary decisions about who's in the club and who's out of the club. And I think that their capacity, to play sports, with people of all different sizes and do that without injuring anybody, or have social banter or a dance, that a school dance where people can participate at whatever level they're at without feeling, on the spot or ostracized. You're included, but to the extent, that you want to be. I think that, allowing kids to set the tone and sort of own, the dynamic has produced wonderful cultures from my experience. And with regards to safety, there's two pieces that I think are in play. One is that you get buy-in, so it doesn't matter what rules you have if nobody is bought into them, and what's wonderful in this, even this, my kids sometimes grouse about the rules at school. Right now, there's some rules that they don't like at all and think are stupid. And my son today came home with the disappointment because the stupid rule didn't get changed. But at least, even though he hates this rule and thinks it's really dumb, he understands that he had his shot at the democratic process. He made his pitch for changing the rule, and somebody made a pitch to authority that he thought was just absurd, but the masses bought it, and so he lost the argument for the day. But I think that overall the idea is that the kids buy in, the whole community buys in, and so then it's not, as was alluded to, this culture of well, the staff made up these rules, and so they're the staff's rules, and it's the staff's job to enforce, and then it's our job as kids and students to evade the surveillance and pass the notes and get away with. I mean, that's a game that you could have a lot of fun with as a student. But it certainly, if safety, is your goal, your return on investments are, you're going to get diminishing returns.
Yeah. I think this question and this point about responsibility and freedom is the place where, in my experience, that Sudbury schools are sort of unique in the self-directed space in some ways, that there's a real emphasis on responsibility, and the democratic governance is that's how that's meted out in a community space where it's not just that you're responsible for your time and for what you do and for what you learn, but you're also responsible for this community that provides that freedom to you, and that we that's just such a place of growth and learning too, and a place where kids there's so much richness to that that aspect of the model, and that if you have freedom, you have kids who are learning the things that they really love, and they are being enabled by the adults around them who are doing all of the work for them and cleaning up and making the plans, then that's basically, that child is not really, we're not doing them any favors, because maybe they're learning a lot of cool content because they love dinosaurs, and then you take them to the Natural History Museum and they love this, and then you take them there, and they're learning all that content maybe, but they're not learning how to get around in the world, and they're not learning how to like make things happen for themselves. And that's the actual skills that we're trying to teach. It's not, or that we want them to come out with. We don't actually, I say all the time at our school, like if you want to plan a field trip, you can plan a field trip to anywhere. We go to the movies. It's not like the spot that you go to has to be educational. The process of getting there is the education. And so sometimes parents look at like, why do you guys make it so hard on them? Like if they want to go, like, let's just do field trips all the time. Aren't those great? And I want my kids to go on all the field trips, because they're looking at the content, and the content is secondary. Yeah.
Cassie, I don't know if everyone has heard this, but the old thing about, oh, you give a person a fish, and then if you teach them to fish, but then have you heard people talk about if you teach them to teach themselves to fish, that when the lake dries up, they go gather berries, it's like you teach them to teach themselves, and then they're not even locked into like one career path or one means to sustenance. They can then teach that skill of teaching themselves, you can apply to. And I think, Juliet hit that point. Like, I know my kids can learn, because and then once they can learn, that's the keys to the kingdom.
Okay, I've got one more question for you guys before we turn it over to the audience for questions. And it is, do you think it's hard for kids to adapt to a self-directed school if they've spent time in a traditional curriculum-based school?
Yes. Yes, I'll give a quick spiel. When I was the admissions officer at the Philly Free School in particular, I used to tell parents, expect there to be a transition period, and expect it to be a little bit rocky. Often you would see a honeymoon period in which kids are just elated and they're grabbing all the low-hanging fruit. I mean, I don't know if this is still other people's experiences, but we used to say, expect your kid to need at least a month for every year that he or she or they were enrolled in a conventional school setting, just to unschool, just to get those old habits off. And then after that, you can start looking for a return on investment and looking to see growth and measurement. So a kid who's a typical kid might come to us at 11, 5 or 6 years of bouncing around, and we would say, if it's September, forget it. Don't even look until March, and that's right at the time, of course, that we're going to ask you to fill out your re-enrollment. But you won't see it yet. So I started to tell people, give it a 2-year. If you like opening a restaurant, if you see your money's like going straight down and you try and measure, are we turning a profit? You're not. At the beginning, you're not going to. So you got to be comfortable giving it a 2-year window. And if you do, the parents that came in and the kids that came in thinking it might be a 2-year window before I see these tremendous benefits, the folks that stuck around till the end of that second year, I think we're much more likely to turn the corner and see the return, and then the parents and students would have less anxiety about their 3rd and 4th years.
And I would agree that it's definitely a yes for us as well. In part because you have to realize they've been going to a system that tells them, we know what you're supposed to know. We know when you're supposed to know it, and we know how you're supposed to learn it. And we're the only people that know that. You don't. And so the transition to seeing staff as equal human beings that actually respect you and that are not going to tell you what to do, but also the transition of, I can figure out what I need and what I need to know and when I need to know it and how I need to learn it, takes time. And it can be very, very difficult and painful. But without a doubt, the rewards that you get for the rest of your life are worth all the work and pain that it can be to push through all of that.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. You guys covered it. Yes, it's a transition, and it's worth the process. But and it looks different for everyone too. there's definitely kids who come in. There's usually always that honeymoon period, like, oh, I'm free, I can do whatever. There's some kids who were like, who really internalized that I want to please the adults and I need to do all of these things. And I make sure that, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to ask for classes, I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to do all these projects. And like, it takes them a really, really long time, especially if they're older, to like stop doing that, to really find who they are and what they care about. And then there's the kids who were sort of like, maybe they were full of anxiety about school. We've seen some kids who, basically didn't come to school for a while because their old school was so, they were like filled with anxiety and depression. They couldn't get out of bed. And so when they first started coming to our school, it would be like really sporadic, and it would take them time to figure out that it was safe, and then and really start to open up. And so that process looks different, but yes, because there's educational trauma that those kids are having to heal from. So.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer my questions. Now I want to turn it over to Jason, who will be fielding questions from the audience.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, my video's off. Here we go. If anybody has any questions for any of our panelists, you can either use the Q&A box or button on your screen, or there's also a raise hand. If you don't feel like typing your question, you can raise your hand and I can invite you to speak. So there was one question that came in to chat during the panel, and someone asked, Ramona asked if Reb could talk more about the aspects of his schooling experience that he wanted to make sure his children did not experience. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, Reb, anybody else has any questions, feel free to send them along.
Hi, Ramona. I'm not really sure that like the details of what aspects of my experience were unhappy are necessarily important, because I've seen enough kids make the transition into these schools that the commonality is there regardless. If you're a misfit, and by that I just mean a bad fit for your conventional school setting. If you're academically ahead, that could lead to this same unhappiness. If you're labeled as academically behind, that could lead to it. If you're socially outcast, if you have a different body shape than kids, it doesn't matter what that shape is. You're too tall, you have a different background, for whatever reason. I think that conventional schools really look for a homogenization, and a lot of kids that don't aren't able to ride the center of that bell curve comfortably, find themselves outcast, for some reason or another. And that's the core of, I think, what my initial distancing was between myself and my education. It certainly got worse for me once I started to examine that, or become aware that there was this disconnect. I made the connection pretty young that I hadn't consented to the authority that my teachers had over me, which was a radical and probably a problematic thought for a kid with no power to change, the dynamic, to stumble upon. I'll say briefly that my first job out of high school, I enlisted in the Marines. I got trained as an interrogator. One of my early trainings was in like how to survive life in captivity. And I immediately was like, oh, I totally know this, because these are all the things that I just did to get through public school. And, this idea that, these are your captors and you have no power to resist them openly. But, if you bury this sense of self real deep and you just parrot back the things that the state wants you to say, like this was the framework, excuse me, that I had kind of already cast my public school or my conventional school experience in. So that's probably more than enough to kind of tell you what I was hoping to avoid for my kids.
And I didn't mention earlier, but Jason is a staff member at the Three Rivers Village School. with me.
Thank you for your service.
Today, I'm mostly just trying to be the tech guy to keep Zoom working properly for webinars. So always get to learn new things at a Sudbury school, even as staff.
That's true.
You have to serve many roles, not just working with kids. There's a lot of things.
Are we waiting for questions to come?
Yeah, we're hoping for more questions. Anybody else has anything that they're curious about, I'd be excited to hear.
I got one if you've got dead airspace, but don't make me, I have a question, not an answer.
Yeah, let me, we actually have somebody who's hoping for to ask a question. I'm gonna see how good I am at doing this. All right. Hi, Julie.
Hi, am I unmuted?
You're unmuted. Everyone can hear you.
Excellent. Hi. So I'm a current parent of a student at TRVS, and I may ask this question at every gathering where we talk to other people. I would just like to say that the descriptions of free democratic schools are utopic to me, right? Like you have these sense where, oh, there's a 10-year-old that can do this. Oh, there's this kid who decided to, become a PhD or a doctor or all these things. And so you hear these stories about how beautiful it is, right? The day-to-day experience is kind of ugly. And so bridging that gap is like, it's a really difficult thing as a parent to look at it and say, really, all I see is this teenager who doesn't leave their room, or this teenager who doesn't do anything for themselves, or, I don't see what happens every day. So what I hear back is, I don't participate in school meeting, or I don't participate in these things. And so what's told to me is that I'm not engaging, right? So what I see at home and what I hear from them about what's happening is basically just an abdication of everything. Like I'm not taking responsibility. I'm not learning anything. I don't want to learn anything. I'm never going to grow up. It's the Peter Pan thing, maybe, right? So I feel like, do you ever see kids just punt and be done with it and not do anything, not take responsibility for their own education, not take responsibility for doing things? And then, how do you know that that's happening? And, does that just mean this model is not good for that particular person? Or is it really just what I see, and it's the whole elephant and the tail versus the ear versus the leg problem? Like what I'm seeing is not actually the whole picture. I'm just seeing a very small part of the picture, and that's where the trust comes in. So I don't know if that's a question, but I'm going to stop there.
So I wanted to say that's absolutely a valid concern. Something I've noticed, I'm not super sharey about the day when I get home from school, and my brother gets home from school. It doesn't necessarily matter what he's done. He'll just say, I didn't really do anything, even if he went out and did a bunch of stuff. He's just not super sharey about it. And I think one part of it is that there's always something going on at school, and sometimes kids just aren't inclined to share about it. So even if they're not participating necessarily in school meeting, they're still participating in some way. And I think the other part of it is that I think this goes specifically for kids who used to be in public school and then transferred to TRVS. There's a kind of burnout. Oops. There's a kind of burnout that comes from going to public school. For months after I started at TRVS, I would go through periods of time where I was very inactive at school, where I just wanted to sit around and do nothing, because I had been so mentally exhausted from going to public school that it was really hard to take the opportunity to learn the things I wanted to, because of that burnout. So I've noticed it in other kids at school too. And And it's something that does eventually come to an end. There's like, you get your like motivation to get up and start doing things again. And even if it doesn't seem like your kids participating, they are in some way, even if they're not sharing it.
Can I jump in? I want to say to Julie, I love this question so much. I want to make, because I think that we often do paint this idyllic picture, and I want to make sure that we caveat that in a couple of ways. First of all, it is a tremendously difficult school to attend a lot of the time for these students. They are deciding what to do with their time. They are deciding what's important, what's worthy of their attention, to what standard of mastery something, it should be attended to. They're doing things that most grown-ups struggle with, which is like this immediate payoff versus a long-term goal, and trying to acquire the discipline, to get it all done, or the weigh the responsibility of parental expectations and societal expectations and self expectations. So like, there's a lot of stress and anxiety that you cannot get away from when it's internalized. So I want to, number one, indicate that there's a side to it that is extremely difficult and challenging for kids. So I wouldn't want to gloss that over. But then your question about, and is there a student that you might say, yeah, this is just not a good school for them? I want to make sure that we say yes, that that we don't try and posit that this is the right school for every kid and every kid can do it. I think the vast majority of kids can, but the main obstacle in my experience is parents looking to measure that growth too soon and not giving the kids enough time to figure it out. I think most kids, if you give them the time and space, will get their legs under them, and they will figure out their life and start driving it in a way that's satisfying to that kid. But I also think that it's important for us to say, hey, it may not be for everybody, because I don't want the kids that go to the school to think on some level that it's just automatically going to happen for me if I just put in my time, because you have to accept that if it's self-directed education, that the result is going to be contingent on the effort of the individual learner, and if you have a person who, has decided to start coasting early, or who's, for whatever reason, has decided that he or she or they don't want to do anything, academically, then I think all that they'll learn, or all that they'll get out of this philosophy, is then the notion that, okay, then you won't. Nobody can make you. And then and even if you're 25 and you're sitting with that lesson, like, well, this is where I am in life, but that's a function of what I chose, the choices I've made so far and what I've decided to do. At least they know, well, then I could probably change that and take it in a different direction if I want to.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a worthwhile goal of an education.
And I just want to put in, because in all the years that I've done this, the kids that have not worked out, that have left our school, are not kids that I would say we couldn't have worked for them. There's factors involved, like what their home life is, what their experiences were before they got here, that really impacted their ability to get even to the point of believing that they really did get to choose. And so I would say I would have a hard time saying this wouldn't work for kids coming through the door at 4. Most any 4-year-old, to be honest with you. I truly believe in what we do, and I do think it's best for everyone. But there are experiences that people have before they get here that are out of our control, that in a lot of times are out of their control, that are very difficult to get past. And there are some that decide they can't and they leave. But I really think for the most part, they're far and few between. And it's really about, we spend a lot more time when we do admissions and interactions and support is with the parents, much more so, because that home life is the biggest part of their lives. They are not here, well, except our boarding students,
Yeah.
they are not here 24/7.
So, oh goodness, I forgot what I was going to say. I think coming from someone who went to public school or went to mainly traditional schools, up until I was 15, I think had I like started going to a democratic school like right out the gate, like when I was 4 years old, I probably would have really benefited from that. And I probably would have avoided a lot of, pain and heartbreak from that. Because I've noticed that some of the other students who have been going to Sudbury schools their whole life have a very different approach to learning. And they're a lot more gung-ho about finding new things every day, and especially the younger kids. And I think that something that public school does for a lot of kids that that might make it difficult for them to participate fully in a democratic school environment is public school can often kind of crush your spirit. Like you're stuck sitting in a chair all day, listening to somebody teach you something you're not necessarily interested in. You're always being told to be quiet. You have to ask to go to the bathroom. And often you have to have lunch too late or too early, and you're tired all day. And then they send you home and you have like an hour of homework to do. So school continues even when you go home. And there's just this, I think, burnout and like there's damage from it that often can make it difficult for kids to fully get the full experience and the full benefits from democratic school. I still think it can be very beneficial because it has been for me, and it has been for my brother and other people who I know who've been to public school before. But I think that like the younger you start, the more beneficial it is.
I wanted to just really quick share an anecdote, because any utopian fantasies I had about TRVS were pretty much destroyed on my tween's first day. Blue had experienced a lot of trauma and negative peer interactions at their previous school. And so we were like, oh yeah, this is going to be such a better experience. On their very first day, a kid bit them.
Right.
Bit them. Yeah. And I was like, what?
Oh.
But it was great. But then I realized like, oh, this is so good, because my child has just learned that they are in an atmosphere of universal accountability. There's no such thing as impunity. Everyone is accountable. It doesn't matter if a teacher saw it. It doesn't matter, like if a staff member had bit my kid, they would still have this. I mean, they would have probably a hierarchy. There would probably been a whole different situation, but literally every single person is accountable to the community. So it was like hard. It was like shocking that happened, but it was great in this other way, because on the very first day that they started there, they learned that conflicts do not have to end up being unsafe. People can go through things. Very first day, Blue learned how to write somebody up for JC to take them to Justice Committee. I thought that was fantastic. So it's difficult, it's messy.
And this is also in contrast to when he went to public school. Kids would hit him and call him names and stuff, and he'd just let them, because he's a very non-confrontational. He does not like to fight with people. The only person I've ever seen him fight with is me. And some kids in the past few months, he does get into arguments and debates with other kids at school, which is a very new thing to see, because I've never seen him argue with anybody before. So personally, I'm really glad to see that. I'm really glad to see my brother kind of come out of his shell a bit more at school and be more independent, which
Yeah.
is
And that can't happen without the messiness too.
Yeah.
That can't happen without the mess.
Yeah,
It's got to be there.
I think, Julie, your comments reminded me, like Julie talking about, oh, we're painting a rosy picture. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like if if we were to talk hypothetically about, kids are just figuring out how to be people, and sometimes people are just terrible to one another. Especially when they don't yet know the limits of power. Sometimes they. So when I say, oh, kids create a culture of respect, I don't mean that they have some innate capacity to magically respect one another. They don't. They figure it out by trial and error, and a lot of error and a lot of arguing. And my daughter can talk to you about being on a JC day that was like 4 hours of JC judicial committee where they're trying to resolve these complaints. And the whole, I've heard kids say some things that shocked me, and I felt like I didn't want to hear that language or be exposed to that concept. And then these kids, but it is a beautiful process when the kids then air they talk about why, why was it oppressive to not just the girls in the computer lab when this 11-year-old boy pronounced what he would do to somebody's mother who had just murdered him in the game. And it was so shocking and awful. But when the teens, girls in particular, taught the younger kids like why this hostile language isn't okay and the harm that it does, the result was really, like, you go back to that point of buy-in. That message was absorbed by the community in a way that it wouldn't if I was like, memo from Planet Grown Up, some words are hurtful, and this one is one of them.
So that's a great example. So this is, like, I would love to know that my kid is doing that. I have the sense that that's not necessarily happening, that they're in the small room and that they're not engaged. And again, I don't know. I'm not there. I just hear little things. And so as a parent, what I'd like to, I guess the bigger, broader question is, like, if what she's telling me, what they're telling me is, I don't do anything, I don't participate, I just go, I just do this, blah, blah, everything's blah, is there still a chance that things are going the way that they're supposed to be going and they're still going to be successful human beings when they come out the other end, right? Like, because I definitely, at this point, we have bought into that. We've bought into the, they're not going to do anything because I've said they need to do it. I completely understand that. And, but I still want to have some sense that things are being learned and that when they turn 18 and I say, hey, maybe it's time to get a job, like, they're going to know how to do that and want to do that and have some goals. And like, I don't know how, I don't see at this point in time, poor kid, 14 years old, I don't see how we're going to bridge the gap between 14 and 18. Yeah. And I want somebody to tell me how that gets bridged, please.
I can give you one comforting piece of advice, Julie, which is one, like, kind of toxic messaging of this rubric of, like, grade level is that you have to be a fully formed adult at 18.
Right.
And
no, that's true.
Binary,
Yep.
That you're 17 as a child and you can still make mistakes, and then 18 you have to know. So just understand, first of all, that this is a transition from 14 to 44 or 34. There's no point at which somebody's going to come tell your kid, well, this is your life now, so this is what it needs to stay. You didn't get it figured out by the deadline, and so it's too late for you. And if you, I don't know how long your kid has been at school, but I do want you to worry as a parent. I think you continuing to share your concerns with your kid, that might be healthy, especially if you can balance it with this staff perspective of this, like, almost like a Zen-like faith that they are going to figure it out, and you just need to give them more time.
Yeah,
both things are
fair.
true. Your worry is valid.
I would just jump in real quick to say,
I obviously don't know how long your child has been at the school, and I don't know your child's experiences before they got to this school. But kids who are transitioning from traditional schools and traditional lives know the buttons to push. And so if what you're doing is saying, well, what are you doing all day? And how are you learning things? And what did you learn today? The response to that is probably going to be, I did absolutely nothing, and I'm participating in nothing, and I don't do anything.
Yeah.
Because that's their response to you.
Yeah.
So learning how to listen without the constant questioning is really important. And so it's not, what did you do today? What meetings were you involved in? What have you been? It's, hey, guess what I did today? Here's my day. Share my day. And then that leaves space for if they want to share their day. If not, let it go. Because if you're asking a question, looking for an answer, you're probably not going to get the one you want.
Fair. Yeah, fair.
Thanks, Julie. That's a great question.
Thanks.
We have another great question that someone's asked in the Q&A that I want to invite our panelists to answer. That is, hold on a second. An anonymous question said, as learning can often be a privilege in public schools, how do democratic schools work against that? Is there a place for low-income students at democratic schools?
Thank you.
That's a great question.
I can jump in, given that where we're located is very, very low socioeconomic status. Our whole community locally is, and that has always been true. And so we've always done things like work credit programs so that they can earn money off of what their tuition is. And we've always worked extremely hard to keep our tuition really low. Because the reality is, if we're only going to have people who are privileged enough to pay substantial money, we would have no students where we are. It's part of our culture. So we've always worked really, really hard with every individual family to meet them where they are so that their student, if they really want to be here and the parents really want to be here, can be here.
So I thought I'd weigh in. So my family, when I started going, the tuition at my school is on a sliding scale. So full tuition is about $9,000 per year. However, there are there's a financial aid program. So depending on the family's financial status and income, they might not have to pay as much. And so we only ended up paying about $2,000 for the year. And so that's made this a lot more accessible to us because we're a bit lower income than some of the kids going. And yeah, it's made it more accessible. And I think, yeah, the point of the school isn't to be only for rich kids and only for kids who are like in the higher places of society. It's supposed to be for everyone. And I think that's really reflected in how tuition is, how the process is, because when we last year, at the beginning of this year, we were worried we might not be able to afford to go back, and my parents thought they were going to have to pull me and my brother out. And the school worked with us to make sure that we would be able to pay for the year and stay there because they wanted us to stay. And that meant a lot. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think each of us can speak specifically for our schools and how we've like tried to handle this question and the problem of, the issue with tuition too is that like, okay, at the same time that we want to make our schools really accessible to families of all income levels, we also want to pay our staff members something that's not poverty range. And it's really hard to balance those two missions. So, but I do, from my knowledge of Sudbury schools in particular, not necessarily, so democratic schools is a really big category and covers a lot of different schools around the world. And some of them are just, they're private schools, and here's your tuition, pay it or don't, and if you can't come, you can't come. So, but from what I know of most Sudbury schools is there's usually some pretty decent financial aid or sliding scale tuition. The open school does a sliding scale tuition. We actually followed in Philly Free Schools steps, and I believe I even spoke, I think it was Reb who actually downloaded everything to us as far as what they did over there. And we basically kind of modeled after Philly Free School, and have seen that the sliding scale tuition in particular has been really helped with equity and access for people and we have people on all parts of the scale who come, and even those who are at the lowest end of the scale, if they can't make ends meet, we try to work with them too, and to reach out. We do not want we don't want it to be a choice between paying rent or sending your kid to a Democratic school. That shouldn't be a choice. You shouldn't have to make that decision. So we do, as far as I know, most Sudbury schools work really hard. We do fundraising and other things in order to try to make that work for people from all income brackets.
So I just thank you, Cassie, and I know we've had a lot of conversations about this topic, and someone commented to me, to the panelists, that I have a lot I want to say on the topic. I got permission to just put my email out there, and I'll just share it with anybody who wants it. If you want the full dissertation, I think you could just contact the organizer and get it. Because the bottom line for me, it's true that most of the Sudbury schools are working hard. I don't think we're doing all that we could do, and I think that unfortunately the flagship school continues to maintain this philosophy where they'll state that they don't believe in financial aid. It's social engineering or something. That's just like the one. Like your ridiculous grandfather says something at Thanksgiving, and you're like, other than that, he's a good person, and I love him. We're not doing enough, in my opinion. Because people that need access to these schools have the most barriers to get there, and I just think that there's a lot more we could do and say about that. So let's circle up outside of this, and let's make sure that we're having those conversations.
Great.
Yeah, I was
Like
just going to
anybody
say,
who wants to participate.
I was just going to say really briefly, basically if families want to do work credit at school, so it's things like cleaning rooms or doing lawn mowing, our tuition monthly, if they do the full amount that they want, is $50. Our minimum is $50 because we have to be able to buy toilet paper and pay the electric bill. But that's the community we're in. And in fact, that is of recent times. For the first 25 years of the school, the minimum was $15.
Yeah. I don't mean to point my finger and say like, you're not doing enough and you're not doing. That's not, I just,
yeah. But I'm just saying, like, because of where we are, that's the reality. Like a sliding scale wouldn't help us.
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
No, sorry.
I was just going to say our boarding program, when we have it, that's one of the ways that helps supplement to cover the costs for our local community, because boarding students from other countries pay more money. I mean, that just is what it is, but they bring a lot to it.
Great. I mean, it's a huge question. I mean, and the reality is that if we offer no tuition, then kids just have to start covering their own lunch and breakfast, which they get now at public school. And so like we can charge nothing, and still it's an economic hardship for kids to come to our school. And so it's a really hard question that we think about and work on all the time, and need to continue to press on in our schools. And I'm really glad you raised it. And we have some more questions. I'm going to invite.
Can I interrupt you really fast? We have kind of hit our mark in time. Are the panelists okay to stick around for a little bit longer? For how many questions are there?
We have 2 hands up right now. And those are, we have 2 questions left that are on the table right now.
All right, are you all able and willing to stick around for 2 more questions?
Sure.
No, learning has to happen at schedule. The bell is ringing.
I don't
So
know
we
if you
must
have a,
all, we have to go to chemistry now. It doesn't matter if you're interested in art.
well, I was
directs
concerned that you
us.
have a dinner on the table or
Thank
some
you for asking and being
date with
sensitive.
the wife, or I don't know.
Well, since everyone's sticking around, then I think Joe, I'm guessing it's Joe, has a question for us.
Oh yeah, sorry, I don't know how to change my name. So I want to just really affirm Julie's question from earlier. Like, I really feel that my kids are in their 3rd year at TRVS. Well, 2 of them, and they've never really had much of any other schooling other than, some brief homeschooling before that. And I totally buy the model philosophically, and and still don't see a lot of, I don't know, that's not true. Okay, well, let me just get into my question. Anyway, thank you, Julie, for that. And relatedly, one of the things that I really worry about are the sorts of decisions that the effects simply can't be seen. So it's real, they can't be seen right now. So it's really hard for kids to be able to make good decisions about something at a particular time. So a really obvious one is like what kinds of foods you eat or physical activity you might do, right? I mean, the sugar intake at TRVS is just absurd, right? But you don't know that that's a problem until you're 50. And there's really no downside when you're 10 to just unlimited amounts of sugar. It's great. So I just don't know that students even have at a school like this even have the capacity to make good decisions about that. And the learning process can be detrimental. And I mean, I think things like that might also be true of, if you decide when you're 18 that you want to go into astrophysics, well, sure, you can learn calculus, but like there's already some backup that didn't happen in those intervening years. So those are the kinds of things that I worry about is like I trust them to make the decisions that are right for them now. But sometimes I'm just not sure that the information is that it's even possible to have the right kind of information to make decisions that will affect you much later.
I just want to say, I didn't go to high school, as I recently said. I didn't go to high school. I got a bachelor's degree in biology, and I have a master's in journalism. My husband never did band or played any kind of musical instrument until he was 18. He started playing drums. He's a pro drummer. So I really don't think that, I mean, I think I'm not like 100% sure that kids in a like traditional school have that knowledge or information or a decision-making ability either. And some things we just decide later, some things we embrace later. And, there are, my many fellow musicians that we've known over the years who grew up going to, basically listening to their parents play music or their church, and they played music from a very young age, and they're very, very skilled at a level that someone who started playing later won't be, but that's okay. I can't live anybody else's life. Nobody else can live my life. I'm living my life. So I don't know. I guess to me, that's not like, I'm not so worried about my kids being like deciding that they want to do something and then absolutely categorically not being able to in such a way that it's, I don't know, like damaging, I guess.
And I just want to sort of jump in. So my brother, who also went to school here for his whole career, decided his sophomore, junior year of college that he was going to be a doctor. He didn't have traditional classes at our school. He hadn't gone through chemistry labs or organic chemistry or any of the things that people think you need to do soon in order to catch up. He is a pulmonologist now. He had no problem. And he talks about the experience of his chemistry lab was the creek when he went out and played in it and he observed animals and he interacted with his environment, how much he learned from those experiences that no one looked at and would say, wow, you've had all your science classes. What we pick up and what we understand about the world around us isn't only in an academic traditional setting, and the things you carry and understand from those experiences aren't linear. They're not just this one thing. And I truly believe, having done this forever, that if there's something I'm passionate about, I figure it out. And as far as food, because that's the one you started with, we've had so many people over the years, parents freaking out about the foods their kids are ingesting. And my personal experience is, yeah, maybe you don't know till you're 50. Maybe there are some consequences, but generally kids figure it out a lot sooner than that, because there are some consequences. It may not be the same as when you're 50, when you eat nothing but sugar, but kids realize it and they learn to listen to their bodies and what it's telling them. And I think that's important thing to know, as opposed to someone else telling you this is what's good for your body. My husband, to this day, cannot eat about 90% of vegetables because his grandmother made him eat them. I've never had this problem with the kids in my house or me, because it's, do you want to try it? Sure. You don't? Fine. So letting go of some of that and definitely knowing that they'll figure it out. They really, really can, is important.
I just want to briefly say, Joe, I feel your pain a little bit. I have an 11-year-old son who's out playing Gaga all day long and is yet to grasp, when he comes home with a sunburn on his face, you know, his mom, he has yet to absorb his mom's concern, like to the extent that he's adjusted his behavior. You know, I think I finally like connected with him, because he was like, it's not really like doing me any harm. And I was like, oh, okay, you don't grasp. I was like, it's like smoking. You're not going to know the harm it's doing right now. You think, oh, I can do this when you're, 15 and 16 and 17, 18, you don't feel the consequence. You know, when I told him, oh, it's like smoking, I think he was like, oh, all right, I get, but I do think that as a parent, you still give your perspective, you know what I mean? And you can still communicate, hey, I'm worried if you only eat sugar or whatever, but I think that Noelle's point is also, I completely support it, that you want them to have buy-in, you want them to figure it out for themselves. And even if it takes them, a couple of years, I think that it's probably the case that, like what Juliet talked about going to college and then these kids they're making terrible choices. I had a former student talk about this experience. She's like, these kids don't know anything. These kids, they're free for the first time. My roommate ate ice cream for all her meals. Like, she thought that was a good meal. And like, that was such a minor, stupid thing to do for a college kid that I just thought was emblematic. But this is a thing that I think your kids might be wrestling with at 9 or 15 or 13. It doesn't matter. It's the earlier that you start wrestling with it, I think the more likely you'll be to have figured it out by the time you're 50.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we have to be careful of, there's this tendency for parents, and I'm speaking as a parent myself, is that we catastrophize things and we're like concerned like everything could lead to death, and that's like really, they actually, you know, if I ate sugar all the time, I would do probably more damage to myself than what my 12-year-old son would do to himself, just because first of all, he's metabolizing it super fast, and you know, he just doesn't have the same number of years on him. And so there's a lot of things, you know, I'm like, oh my God, you're going to get diabetes. And, you know, and I just have this like tape of this horrible thing that's going to happen to him. And really before that happens, he's going to feel the consequences. And I think that this is, I just want to highlight, this is another great reason why these schools exist, and why sometimes you as a parent have these things that like, hey, you know what, in your house, you serve this healthy meal, you don't eat dessert till after dinner, you have these, you know, but you can know, like, you know, I want my child to experiment with food, or, you know, whatever. And I want them to have the freedom without having an adult, you know, nag at them about this thing, but I don't think I can be that adult. So I'm going to let TRVS staff be that adult. Like they can, you know, they can create this space where my child can, you know, have this freedom to experiment and learn, because this is just a trigger for me, and it's really hard for me to do it at home. And I think that's okay too. That's part of why we offer the schools that we do, so that these kids can have that space.
I just wanted to say really quickly, because it's also not in a vacuum. There's other kids there. There's people of all ages that they're interacting with, and their experiences they're hearing too. So it's not like they're on an island, good luck. There's all kinds of interactions that are going on all day with all people of different backgrounds and different experiences and different knowledge that impacts those choices as they figure it out for what works for them.
Thanks so much, Joe, for that question. We have one more question. Hold on, let me get this up. This is from Mary, who's another staff member at TRVS. Let me click her in. Hi, Mary.
I'm muted.
You're muted. There you are.
Sorry.
Your hand was up for a really long time, so I kind of just jumped on you there.
I'm sorry. You know what? My hand wasn't up actually. I did that by accident. I'm sorry. I apologize.
All right.
Well,
Well,
hi.
Hi.
Okay, well, that was all the questions we have right now. I guess I'll pass it back to Maggie, or I guess we can.
Oh, I'm just gonna wrap it up and start by saying thank you so very much, Cassie, Noelle, and Reb, and Juliet, and Ari. It was amazing and awesome that you guys came and shared all kinds of insight and stories, and it was wonderful. And I want to also say thank you to the audience, everyone who came. I appreciate you engaging with the discussion and giving us lots of thought-provoking questions. And Jason, thank you so much for running tech, because I couldn't do it myself, I don't think, unless I had a couple of weeks to really dig in. And also, I just wanted to remind the audience that, and also the panelists, if you're interested, that this is a part of Remake Learning Days, and that is a week-long festival of lots of different Zoom events and in-person. I guess some of them might be in-person events that are all kind of different innovative educational approaches and different schools showcasing maker spaces and all kinds of things. And that is at remakelearningdays.org. And also, anyone that wants to find more out about TRVS, we're just at info at TRVS. Well, excuse me, let me back up. I'm going a little fast here. It's info at 3riversvillageschool.org, and the 3 is spelled out. Yeah.
Juliet just dropped a link in the chat to the article that she mentioned earlier that she wrote about TRVS, and kind of how our school process through the pandemic and the changes that we needed to make through that process. If anyone's interested in that. And yeah, check that out if you're interested in that. It was a great article.
Yeah, it is. Thank you, Juliet.
Wow, it was so fascinating living through all of it that I just felt like it had to be a story.
Cool. All right. Well, again, thanks everyone.
Thank you very much. It was good seeing you guys.
Yeah, and we'll be in touch like with a follow-up to get you the recording of this and just to, you know, touch base, see, you know, maybe get some impressions of the night, but I'll be in touch.
Sounds
Bye.
good. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. So nice meeting all of you.
See you.
Yeah. Well,